Okay, hi. Welcome back to week 2 of E111. And now is a good time for us to start off reviewing any of the questions you had from last lecture, things you mentioned in your feedback at the end of the day that were unclear. And so I'm going to pause and let Treaty answer any of the questions that you had. Okay. So we're working our way through all these different types of genres that we work with as engineers and scientists. And I wanted to return to the work that we did with the journal article last week before moving on to the proposal. So we talked a lot at the end of class last time about writing introductions that meet our audience's needs and expectations. And so I want to spend some time at the beginning of class today working on the drafts that you wrote as part of your homework and perhaps start at the end of class last week. So we're going to spend a little bit of time reading each other's introductions, reviewing them for a lot of the different elements that we talked about last time, and providing some feedback. And this is both a really important part of the writing process, and it's also really good practice when the stakes are lower for the type of feedback and responding to the feedback we receive from reviewers during the peer review process. And so what I'd like you to do now is form pairs, ideally with someone that you haven't yet worked with, and spend about 15 minutes per person reading their paper, writing down some notes, making some comments, and then sharing that feedback. So I'll pause and let you guys do that now. Okay, so moving on to our next topic for the class, I want to talk about using some of the rhetorical elements that we introduced last time, but now in a persuasive way, specifically for writing research proposals. All right, so I have a fun little activity for you to get into the groove of thinking persuasively and communicating persuasively. And so I'm going to ask you to write down a pitch for how you might convince someone of this idea. And the idea I want you to consider is this Astro Cat backpack. So write down 1 or 2 sentences. What would you say to persuade someone to buy this backpack? Okay, so hopefully you guys were able to share some of your awesome ideas for what you would tell someone. Maybe you were really creative talking about new experiences. Maybe you tried to appeal to their sense of style and they love this color yellow. But most likely, the 2 different strategies that you might have taken for presenting your argument are these here. The first is presenting existing solutions and discussing how your idea, this backpack, could lead to some application. So for example, in our toy example, currently, really love our best friend, this cat, but they only can experience the world through this stationary window in our house. They're not able to get out and go around. But with this new technology, the Astro Cat backpack, they now can travel with us and have these experiences with us. Another way that we can present our argument for this idea is beginning first with a motivation. Wouldn't you love to share all your world experiences with your best friend, this cat? However, we're limited by the fact that the cat can only see the world currently through the windows of the house. Therefore, we have this great solution. And so what you'll see a lot of times in different proposals is when we are talking about pitching an idea, a technology push, we're often trying to insert our idea as something expanding an existing solution to provide a new service. And then oftentimes when we're pushing the boundaries of research, you'll often see an argument presented as, we would really like to know the answer to X, or we'd like to develop a product that can do X. However, we have to solve this problem first, overcome a limitation, and then your solution would be a proposed method or a device that could do that. All right. So, persuasive writing. We most commonly see persuasive writing in the proposal genre because this is the central medium through which we as engineers and scientists procure approval and funding to perform a project. Our writing style is explicitly persuasive rather than neutral. So when we're writing a journal article, we tend to be a little bit more neutral, removed, trying to remove our personal biases. But here we're overtly putting them onto the page to convince the reader to see things from our perspective. Proposals themselves can be incredibly varied. They can be informal emails requesting approval. For example, to take this class, I had a few emails trying to persuade me to add each of you to this class. Proposals can also be incredibly formal technical documents, sometimes more than 20 pages. They can be written collaboratively across many institutions globally, and they could be asking for millions of dollars, right? So there's a lot on the line. Okay, so I'd like to take a minute to review some of the homework assignments I asked you to do in response to your reading on these rhetorical strategies. So I asked you to write a paragraph persuading a reader to take a stand, and I gave you two polarizing stands to choose from about an informative genre. All right. So now would be a great time if anyone would like to share their point of view, if they feel like they made a particularly convincing argument. And I want you guys to discuss some of the strategies that you used within your paragraph, within your argument, and maybe make a running list of these on the board. Okay, great. So in addition to that list that you just made, I want to present 6 characteristics of a successful technical proposal. These are the ones that I keep in mind when I'm looking at proposals to give advice or drafting my own. Perhaps the most important piece is addressing a particular set of readers and understanding their needs, right? And so one of the tools we as writers and researchers can use to identify those needs and to address them accurately is to create an audience profile, and we're going to do that in a little bit. The second characteristic of that document is that it needs to explain how we're going to help those readers solve a problem they care about. The document also has to reflect the organization's goals and culture, not necessarily our organization's, but the organization that we're applying to or that our readers are involved in. One thing to consider is what might differ between a document prepared by someone who is in a more educational outreach position or one in a research R01 type position, and what different strengths you might bring to the proposal and able to reflect different organizations and cultures. This can help you choose a more appropriate organization to apply to. One of the other critical pieces of these proposals, and it's also one of the major challenges, is that they're produced collaboratively. So we're going to talk about some strategies for collaborating effectively. And these documents, because they are sometimes long and tedious, they have to be very detailed, they need to use different design elements on the page to increase their readability, and we'll talk about that. And then these documents aren't just text, they also include images, tables, they may include letters of support, and author bios. So they're very complex documents. They include many different subgenres within themselves. Excellent proposals are also honest. We need to be ethical. We don't want to overpromise something that we can't actually deliver within the allotted amount of time or with the funds that we're requesting. And we also need to make sure we accurately describe the limitations of our approach, accurately describe previous research and things like that, because there can be not just money on the line, say if we're promising to build something for a client, but also lives. You can imagine a civil engineer who boasts about the structural integrity of a design when it actually fails to meet certain regulations. That has huge legal ramifications, right? So we need to be very honest. In order to be well understood in both along an ethical lines and also a logical, rhetorical line, we need to be clear. Because these are technical documents, we need to be precise and accurate, and they need to be comprehensive, everything self-contained. All the information to make your case needs to be presented within that document. It needs to be accessible, so we're trying to avoid jargon where possible. We want to make the various information pieces easy to find, i.e. skimmable. It needs to be concise, because our readers aren't going to have a lot of time, and there's going to be a lot of competing proposals that we have to stand out against. It also needs to be professional, both in appearance and in how we write, so grammatically correct spelling, etc. All right, so let's talk about the logistics of writing a proposal. It's a very complex process, and it involves a lot of secondary research. So not just the research we're doing to look at previous works, to establish the background that we need to present our ideas, but research into the organization, research into our readers, their values. So that is our very first step, is first to analyze our audience and identify the appropriate type of proposal that has the greatest likelihood of success. Then we analyze our purpose. Why are we writing? What do we hope to get out of this? And let that help guide which type of proposal we're making. So that decision may come at a number of different time points. Then we need to conduct research, gather information about our subject, our approach, and other options. Once we've decided which type of proposal we're gonna write, which organizations we're gonna submit to, we draft. We have to do this collaboratively oftentimes. And then making sure that we're formatting it according to any guidelines presented in the RFP. Again, collaborating ultimately before submitting. So I mentioned that there's some different types of proposals that we can consider. So I want to explicitly address those. So proposals can be both internal and external, right? And so what I mean by that is that internal proposals are arguments trying to persuade a reader of your point of view, to give you money, to give you approval, that are submitted within an organization for carrying out work that might benefit that organization. So for example, here at Caltech, I could apply for an internal grant, say to get additional funds for resources in the classroom because I want to improve teaching, right? That's an internal type of proposal. Other examples might include recommendations to conduct a survey across a potential market. They might be a proposal to purchase newer computers for all of the designers at your company, or perhaps to change an official policy. External proposals, on the other hand, are arguments, you notice I keep using that word, or they're bids to meet the needs of a person or an organization outside our immediate environment. So you can think about this as a proposal to try and gain a client, right? And this is important because no one organization can produce all the products or services that it needs. So sometimes organizations will go out and actually ask for help. They'll say, hey, we need 200 new computers for our workforce. And they'll present that need to a variety of different companies and then select which one submits the best proposal for lowest cost, highest function, newest models, etc. And so that what I just described is actually a solicited proposal where there's an explicit asking or publishing of the need for a proposal. And these can be in two different forms. First is an information for bid, or an IFB, which is usually used for standard products like the computers that I mentioned. The other that you're probably most familiar with are requests for proposals, or RFPs. And this can be for more personalized products and services. For example, a bridge or other structure, or architectural plans for new building, or it can be for research. There are also unsolicited external proposals. Often these aren't truly unsolicited. There's usually some sort of verbal or informal invitation to submit a proposal. For example, submitting the proposal for this course was unsolicited, but also internal. All right. Every proposal has to have deliverables. Right? Your readers are going to want to know, what are they going to get out of this? If they put in time, money, approval, what are they going to get in return? And most proposals can be grouped into two different categories: goods and services, and also as one, and research proposals as another. So I keep referring to these proposals as arguments, and that's essentially what we're doing. Is we're trying to construct an argument to get our reader to believe in what we can do and have faith in what we propose, and that the science will produce what we suggest it will produce. So there's three key things we have to do in every proposal to make this argument successful. First, we need to understand our readers' needs. Second, we have to present a thorough plan for what we're going to do to meet those needs. And then third, we have to convince them that we're the right person for the job. So let's talk about each of those in detail. First, understanding the reader's needs. This is paramount. So for internal proposals, you have a little bit of a head start because you understand the organization's culture a little bit better. You might have a little bit of insider knowledge as to which direction a company is going. But it's also can be more challenging because you may face political hurdles. There could be sentiment that moving a product in a certain direction is not in the company's best interest, and you may not know that. So it's good to ask around and get as much information as possible before submitting these. For external proposals, we're up against a battle with our readers. They will reject our proposal the second they realize it may not meet their needs. So every step of the way, we need to reiterate this fact that we are moving towards their goals, and that their goals are our shared goals. We also have to do this in a way that takes into account their background and culture. Some companies and some culture have different opinions about what makes an argument persuasive. Right? Do we value the individual more, or do we value the organization as a whole more? And that meeting the organization's culture can also help the plan resonate and be more successful. All right. So part of your homework was to find and analyze an RFP and compare it to the aims and scope that you pulled out for a target journal from last week. So what I'd like you to do now is pair with someone you haven't worked with yet and talk them through, practice being persuasive, how your approach to answering the RFP is different than your approach to addressing the aims and scope when you're submitting your journal, when you're submitting your journal article. And so here's some hints, some guidelines for what information you might be looking for, where things might be different, the background knowledge that your readers are going to require, their expectations of what your text should contain, and the different values and cultures that the reader might share or the organization might share between this journal article and the organization putting out the RFP. All right, so spend a few minutes with each person and then switch. Okay. So as promised, I want to spend some time developing your own audience profile. So we're going to do a little bit of research in class now on the organization or the group that put out the RFP that you identified for your homework. And I want you to gather as much information as possible so that you can predict what persons might be reading the proposal. The idea is to actually imagine and get enough information so we can describe this person or these people in detail. And you'll see on the handout, I'm talking about their values, their expectations. What level of education do we expect them to have? Do they have any personal biases? What's their physical environment like while they're reading our proposals? Are they relaxed? Are they rushed? Is this just one part of their job? Are they under a deadline? How many of these are they reading? Are they excited about it? Why would they care about it? Things like that. So very, very detailed. We're trying to really imagine our reader, almost so we could name them. And so let's spend some time developing this audience profile. And then once you've done that, find someone with a similar RFP and compare your profiles. And see if there's some information or strategies that your classmate was using that you didn't think of, and see if you can incorporate those into your audience profile to strengthen it. All right, great. Now that we've discussed in detail the first point about writing proposals, meeting our audience, I want to move on to the second, which is discussing our plan of action, right? This is sometimes called specific aims when we're discussing our proposal. In this plan, our aims needs to be very thorough, right? This is the section where we're going to establish our logos by showing our readers that we've really done our due diligence, we've done our research, both on where we plan to go and also what potential pitfalls exist within the plan we're proposing. So we want to provide context for our idea, justifying it with evidence, and we need to consider how that fits within the constraints of either the research or the requirements that the RFP has put forward, and also consider any sort of counterexamples or counterclaims that might have a hiccup in our own proposal. And we also need to make sure we clearly define the metrics we're using to decide whether or not our work is successful, and where we're going to include quality control checkpoints so that we know we're on track, and how we're going to communicate that progress to the organization should we receive this proposal or this grant. So engineering claims are strong because they consider many sides. Claims just don't stand on their own, right? So I may be interested in increasing the efficiency of a certain algorithm, and so my claim is that I can increase this 10,000-fold, right? But I can't just assert that. I have to provide some sort of context. First, maybe presenting why I think this technology is able to create that improvement, where the field was before my group got here, etc. So claims rest on context. And we also back them up, like I said, with evidence and other justifications, establishing our logos. They're bounded by constraints and also balanced by any sort of counterclaims or counter-arguments. And presenting these two explicitly within our proposal, and as opposed to omitting them or not mentioning them entirely, hoping they'll fall under the radar, presenting them up front is incredibly powerful, and particularly important in engineering when we have these legal and physical responsibilities beyond just what the research tells us. Our plan also has to be realistic. So oftentimes in the appendices of our proposals, we will present both the timeline that we have created for how we're going to finish this work in what order, and also a budget, a detailed budget for what it's going to cost to actually execute this. And so this is an example of sort of a timeline or task plan. You can see each of the tasks, the key deliverables at each stage in this project, and which week the authors are predicting they're going to be working on those tasks and how long it's going to take. so that the reader can really understand what sort of progress they're expecting to see and what they're investing in. Finally, the third point we want to convey to our readers is that we're the right person for the job, right? This goes back to our ethos, our credibility. So how do we establish that within the text of our proposal? A few explicit pieces of information are often included in the proposal, like an author bio, or, for example, a list of relevant publications that a group has already put out showing success in a certain vein of research, right? So we're trying to include all of our relevant qualifications, our experience. Oftentimes there'll be CVs appended to proposals to describe these elements in detail. Also, if we're planning to tackle a project that involves multiple areas of expertise, we can use our connections and present the work collaboratively and explicitly explain how we're going to work with another group that has access to a different technology, access to a different experimental apparatus, and explain that in the proposal, so that the readers know that we aren't planning on tackling things outside of our areas of expertise. And sometimes even letters of support from centers from which you'll be using equipment, or other investigators, other researchers whose expertise you might rely on, can be included within the appendix of the proposal. All right. So now that we know a little bit more about what goes in the proposal, I want to talk about how it's organized. And always defer to the RFP or the grant solicitation for their specific requirements. So everything I'm going to talk about is more general and sort of the most common format, but many different variations exist, and that's really important to pay particular attention to what is actually requested of you. So a good strategy is trying to convey immediately the value of your proposal to the reader. The readers want to know right away that reading the rest of the document is worth their time. So oftentimes we'll begin a longer proposal with a shorter executive summary, which is sort of like an abstract, but might be a little bit longer and includes different sections, like short summaries of each of the different aims or objectives we're trying to accomplish within the proposal. These proposals are also skimmable, so breaking things into different sections, including very clear section headers, things like that, so that the reader can get a good idea of where information is located very quickly. And like I mentioned, we strictly adhere to any sort of formatting guidelines that the RFP dictates. And so, unfortunately, you can write a great proposal, but it might be rejected simply because you didn't use the format that organization required. That can be as minute as the incorrect font size or the incorrect font, because there are just so many proposals that organizations are looking for excuses to reject yours. Okay, so now here is the rhetorical situation elements that we talked about for a journal article. Let's review how they differ for a proposal. So the audience for the proposal is going to vary greatly depending on whether or not you're writing for an internal or an external grant. But usually the group of readers you're writing for is very small. Contrast that to a journal article where we're trying to have as much readership as possible to improve and increase our impact. Here, the decision makers are often one or two people, right? Will we fund this proposal? It comes down to just a very small group. Again, there's a shared motivation or rationale, but instead of it being a justification of our own motivation, as for a journal article, we really want to align with the motivation of our readers and their organization. The information we need to convey is our objectives, our goals, what existing works are out there and their limitations, and specifically what are the end products or deliverables we're going to be able to hand over to the readers at the end of this process. We spend the bulk of the proposal describing how we're going to do this, and then any sort of significance and impact is always tied back into the readers and their organization. And again, this is often a collaborative writing activity. All right, so in general, and again, this will vary from proposal to proposal, this is the type of structure you can expect to see in a research proposal. It often begins with an executive summary, an extended abstract, then presenting an introduction, which includes a heavy emphasis on the motivation for why this proposal should be funded. And again, this aligns with our readers. Then it presents the actual proposed plan of work to be done, and that has many different names: proposed program, plan of work, specific aims. Each of those should discuss the different strengths and limits of approaches, potential pitfalls, and alternatives that you can pursue if something were to go wrong. Then there's a section that describes you, the writer's qualifications and experience. And then finally, the budget for how, broken down into sufficient detail to understand how the money requested is going to be used in this plan. And then, like I said, there's often a lot of supporting information in the appendices, the timeline or the task schedule, how you're going to evaluate success, quality control measures, a data management plan if you're going to be accruing a lot of data, and a communication plan for how you're going to share your results with the organization or with the world. So each of our content questions and our rhetorical elements here show up multiple times at these different levels, right? So the introduction covers our why and our so what. Our plan details how we're going to do how we're going to perform our work and what we're actually going to do. The qualification and experience explains who's going to do the work. The budget is quantitatively how we're going to get this work done. And then each of these different supporting documents adds to how we're going to do what we're going to do, what we're going to do, and why it matters. All right, so I want to look at this short internal project proposal that was written. And it wasn't asking for any money, so it's asking just for approval, right? So I want you to look and see how it's structured, which elements we're using. Think about how effective, how persuasive the writers are being. Look for any specific language they're using that stands out to you. And let's think if there's any pieces that are missing. All right, so this is Book for You, a social network application for book recommendations. Motivation. Recommending a book to someone is far more complicated than recommending a song or a restaurant because people may have significantly different views for the same book. Current book recommendation algorithms are mostly based on the similarity of the contents of books or the sales data of books, like what Amazon does in recommending purchases. However, these algorithms discard the fact that people's reading habits tend to be affected by their friends, and the best book recommendations usually come from friends with similar reading tastes. In that case, we not only need to discover the relationships between books, but also the relationship between readers and their friends so as to provide smarter book recommendations. Goal. The goal of this project is to develop a social network application that connects people and their friends and provides personalized book recommendations for its users. The recommendation algorithm is based on the content of books, the previous books users have read, and the book that their friends are reading and the recommendations from their friends. Details. Users will log into our Book for You mobile app by their Facebook or Twitter account and thus get connected with their friends. Each user has a private bookshelf and she can rate and label and write reviews for the books they have read. They can also recommend to their friends who might like to read a specific book. We establish a large database of millions of books and rank the books that a user has not read and select the top ones as his or her next recommended book. We also recommend potential friends with similar reading tastes to our users, like what Facebook does in recommending friends, so as to establish a reading social network. The ranking algorithm of a book is based on both the content of the book itself and the rating from the user's friend. For example, when computing the rank of a book, we take into consideration the genre, length, and language style of the book, and we also cluster a group of users' friends who share similar reading tastes with him and predict his rating based on his friend's rating. We expect to see that people's reading habits are easily affected by their friends due to the cascading behavior of reading network. We will also explore different advanced machine learning algorithms when recommending the next book for users. For example, we can train an HMM hidden Markov model based on a sequence of books that the user has recently read. End product and results. The end product of this project would be a user-friendly mobile application that runs a personalized book recommendation algorithm and provides better recommendations for readers. With better recommendations, reading will definitely become more enjoyable. So I want to point out a couple of key things on this page before I move on to the summary of how they presented this. And at the very end of their description of their plan, their single specific aim, they talk about expectations, right? Those predictions are fantastic and add to the credibility. At this point, I really believe them that they can finish this, right? They can actually produce this predictive algorithm. Secondly, I want to point out that they have gone very broad in their scope of discussion about why we should care. Their endpoint isn't that we will be able to make a smarter algorithm. Their endpoint is readers will find reading more enjoyable because they'll have better recommendations. And so I think bringing it back out to a broader level of significance is really important. And that breadth needs to mimic the values and mission of whatever organization we're applying to. All right, so who is the audience? It was internal, it seeks approval only. Their motivation, we need better book recommendations. Some data or citations that support the fact that book recommendations are currently bad might help strengthen their case. They're going to create and improve algorithm that uses social networks, like Amazon. It's very powerful to compare and contrast to existing services. And their end deliverable was going to be a mobile social book app. How they're going to do this? They're going to employ a ranking system or a hidden Markov model, and you'll actually get book recommendations you like. So, did this sound familiar to anybody? It did to me. And so I think that, unfortunately, this group didn't actually do their due diligence to see what prior work had been done, because they effectively just described the platform Goodreads, which recommends books in a social networking type of way. It's like I mentioned before, explicit analysis of your competitors, or if you're doing a research proposal of alternate methods, that creates a really strong proposal, a strong plan, much more so than just failing to identify those competing interests or complications. All right, so one of the major challenges of writing a proposal is that it's often done collaboratively, and it's very difficult to find a unified voice across all of the different writers. Right? So I want to take a second here to explicitly discuss a few different options you can employ when writing collaboratively. And this is something that you should discuss with your other collaborators early on so that everyone is on the same page. Perhaps the most obvious strategy is that every group member writes one idea or one section of the proposal at a time. This is the smallest investment of time. It's very quick to divvy up, but it has a lot of limits. The proposal ideas are usually underdeveloped, and the threads that connect them are often missing. So the other side of that is where things might be missing. Others might be repetitive, right? Because people are thinking about meeting their readers, providing sufficient background, and that the same ideas may come up multiple times. All right, instead, you might consider a situation where the group creates and agrees upon an outline for the proposal together, and then one group member writes the details for each different idea or each different specific aim. Then the group together reads and revises all of those different aims. This is nice because it has a relatively equal workload. Very little editing is required at the end, and it produces, importantly, a really coherent voice, much easier to read. It does require a little bit of investment on the front end. Similarly, another strategy you can take is that the group sort of bookends the important pieces together. So like the introduction, the motivation, and the significance, impact, deliverables are written together so that we can see how things are supposed to begin and end with a coherent voice. And then individuals write the different pieces, knowing where the project is starting and where the project is finishing. That minimizes a lot of the repetition, and everyone gets some sort of say in where the proposal is going and what's promising, because they've been involved in writing the end point. Again, it requires a little bit of investment of time up front, but really important. All right, so now what I'd like you to do is actually get a practice thinking through writing your own proposal before we start to draft it. So using the audience profile sheet you created, now I want you to complete the proposal content worksheet. We have a number of different questions here to get you thinking about how to organize the information and thinking strategically about what additional research you might have to do to actually write this. So spend about 15-20 minutes, do research as needed, think this through, ask questions of each other, solicit someone's advice, opinion, as you fill this out. Okay, great. So now what I want you to do is pair with someone in a closely related field. Read their proposal and provide feedback using these rhetorical elements that we've read about, we've been discussing, and think of specific ways you can improve the persuasiveness of the proposal. And so let's spend another 15-20 minutes on that. All right, the final piece I want to talk about has very little to do with the content, but more how that content is presented on the page, so different design elements. I've mentioned before, perhaps the most critical is making the information skimmable. So we can do this by breaking up an entire page, a wall of text, into different chunks, into different sections to aid into their readability. We can also use descriptive section headers, like the title of the slide. So for example, the title of the slide is "Use Design Elements to Strengthen Your Proposal." I didn't say design elements. Instead, I told you exactly what I want you to do with those design elements and why you should care. I want you to use them because they're going to strengthen your proposal. We can do this in the body of our proposal when we're discussing different aims, so that if a reader is skimming and only looking at the headers, they still understand the main takeaway of each different section. Again, another design element we can use in addition to to help things be skimmable, section headers, as well as judicious use of bold. These different concepts I have used on this page, hopefully to draw your attention to the different points in an effective manner. I'll just let this slide sit here and have you guys read it to get its main point. So if you made it past about this far in the first paragraph, kudos to you. I'm glad you think what I have to say is that important. But what you will absolutely have realized once you get to this portion is that it's really important to use not just text, but also white space to showcase really important information and draw our reader's attention to that. So we can do that with breaking up the document into different sections, using these descriptive section headers, using bold, and letting there be some white space to help break up those points. All right, great. So now what I'd like you to do is expand your proposal outline, the things that you worked on in the proposal worksheet, into a 2-page proposal. Nothing longer. If you go longer than that, great, that's awesome. But what I really want you to do is focus on using these different elements to create a persuasive voice. So we're going to employ logos, our thorough plan, demonstrating a logical thought process, considering our competitors' potential pitfalls, alternatives, establishing ethos, outlining your bio, demonstrating your qualifications, maybe make a list of other publications that your group has presented, or if you've presented a poster at a conference, things like that. And then pathos, using language that's going to communicate the value and impact of your research or your deliverable, getting the reader a little emotionally charged. Is there any statistics we can use to increase pathos? Things like that. Okay, great, off to it. All right, now I'd like to wrap up. Again, we have our Moneyest Point worksheets. Please fill those out for today's lecture, and Treaty will discuss the homework for week 3.